Good afternoon from Vienna, and welcome to this virtual talk on border management in the context of ICSANT, the International Convention for the Suppression of Acts of Nuclear Terrorism. My name is Francesca Andrian. I work in the CBRN Terrorism Prevention Program of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, and I will be moderating this event. This is the first event of a virtual speaker series hosted by UNODC on ICSANT and nuclear terrorism that will feature national and international experts and will touch upon a range of topics related to nuclear security. The series is part of a 3-year project funded by Canada that UNODC recently started implementing and that will be conducted from 2023 to 2026. The title of this project is Strengthening the Global Fight Against CBRN Terrorism through raising awareness and promoting adherence to and implementation of international legal frameworks related to nuclear security. This project is now in its third phase. In fact, we started our collaboration with Canada back in 2018, and we are very grateful for their support to our work in this field. Our first event today will be dedicated to the topic of border management, which is one of the elements of the nuclear security architecture which needs to be put in place in order to prevent and detect terrorist or other criminal acts involving nuclear or other radioactive material. We are very pleased to be joined by 2 international experts who will share with us their long-standing experience and their perspectives on this issue. Mr. John Buchanan from Interpol and Mr. Adam Batchelor from UNODC. Before introducing our experts and giving them the floor, I would like to say a few introductory words about a convention to which UNODC has been devoting increasing efforts over the years, ICSANT, and to explain why and how the topic which is the focus of today's discussion, so border management, is relevant in connection with this legal instrument. To put things in context a little bit, ICSANT is one of the 19 international legal instruments against terrorism that UNODC is mandated by the UN General Assembly to promote. The convention currently has 123 parties. It is primarily an international criminal law instrument in that it establishes as criminal offenses certain intentional and unlawful conduct involving radioactive material, radioactive devices, or nuclear facilities. These offenses range, for example, from the illicit possession or use of radioactive material or radioactive devices to damage to a nuclear facility in a manner which releases or risks the release of radioactive material. State parties to this convention are required to criminalize in their national legislation the acts set forth in its Article 2 and to establish their jurisdiction over these acts. Additionally, ICSANT establishes a number of mechanisms which are designed to facilitate and strengthen international cooperation in criminal matters among its state parties, including, for example, provisions on extradition, mutual legal assistance, and information exchange. International cooperation is especially important given the transnational nature of the threat posed by acts of nuclear or radiological terrorism, and in light of the fact that the consequences of such crimes will often transcend boundaries and affect multiple jurisdictions. One provision of the convention that I would like to particularly draw your attention to is Article 7. This provision requires state parties to cooperate by taking all practicable measures to prevent and counter preparations in their respective territories for the perpetration, for the commission of the offenses that are set forth by Article 2 of the Convention. Article 7 also obliges them to exchange accurate and verified information and to coordinate administrative and other measures to detect, prevent, suppress, and investigate the offenses set forth in Article 2. This provision, Article 7, is particularly relevant for the purposes of our discussion today. Now, if one looks at the text of this provision, one will notice that the word borders does not appear in it, nor does it appear anywhere else in the text of the convention. In fact, this provision is quite broadly phrased, meaning that it does not specify, it does not list the specific preventive measures that a state is required to adopt. However, it is undisputed that border controls, that border management, is one of the key measures that states must adopt to prevent and detect criminal acts involving nuclear or other radioactive material. The timely detection of this material can reduce the risk of this material being used in criminal or intentional unauthorized acts. So it is essential that states establish and implement nuclear security detection systems and measures at state borders. Our experts today will help us understand the importance of detection of nuclear security events involving nuclear or other radioactive material out of regulatory control. So without further ado, we will now move to a moderated discussion, and I am very pleased to introduce our two guest speakers. The first speaker, Mr. John Buchanan, is currently working as a coordinator of Interpol's Radiological and Nuclear Terrorism Prevention Unit, having retired from the UK law enforcement in 2016 as a detective inspector. During his 32 years of service, John spent time as CBRNE and specialist firearms trainer and worked within counterterrorism policing, where he managed a team of regional counterterrorism security advisors responsible for the provision of security advice and guidance on the protection of critical national infrastructure and hazardous sites, such as nuclear facilities, medical research facilities, and hospitals. Our second speaker, Mr. Adam Batchelor, is a strategic trade and export control trainer in UNODC WCO Passenger and Cargo Border Team, PCBT. He delivers strategic trade-related training to operational units, air, land, and sea within this program. He was previously a container control expert, where he interacted with many officials from the Black Sea region, but also with UN member states the world over. Prior to joining the PCBT team over 11 years ago, he worked for over 7 years in the Division of Nuclear Security of the International Atomic Energy Agency, focusing on detection and response for radioactive and nuclear materials out of regulatory control. Mr. Batchelor gained his law enforcement knowledge and experience from the US Customs Service, ultimately Customs and Border Protection, where he contributed to the international training program as both a trainer and coordinator in the field of strategically traded commodities. John, Adam, thank you for being with us. I would like to start by posing a question to both of you. And may I ask John to test if his video and audio works? John, are you with us?
I can hear you. Yes, Francesca, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Great. So I would like to start with you, John. If you agree, I would like to ask you if you can mention any cases, any examples of nuclear or other radioactive material which was seized and detected at borders. And based on your experience, based on these examples, if you can also elaborate and share with us your perspective on how real and serious the threat of this type of smuggling incidents is. John, you have the floor. Thank you.
Francesca, thank you. Firstly, let me say thank you to UNODC for this opportunity, for Interpol, and giving us the opportunity to be here today. I've had a very quick look through the attendance and the people who are online today. I think it's a fantastic audience, and I know a lot of you, so I apologize if you've heard what I'm about to say. But I think it's a great opportunity to reinforce the message, particularly from a law enforcement perspective, as to the importance of ICSANT and having strong legislation. If I can, Francesca, I'd like to maybe answer the second part of your question, answer that firstly, and say, how real, how serious is that threat? From our perspective and what we're seeing, it's very, very much a real and serious threat. What and many people ask me to put a threat assessment on where this is. Very difficult to do that because we don't have a full understanding of the intent. And I hope there's an opportunity to speak about the intent of individuals later on in this presentation. But as it stands, the threat is there, the material is available, it's vulnerable, and there are individuals, both from a criminal perspective and from a terrorist perspective, who are actively looking to acquire that material. And not just acquire it, we are seeing a number of cases where the material is already in the hands of criminals. And I can say that with a degree of confidence and a degree of sadness as well, because just today, I've gone through a list of incidents that we have been sent, we've discovered either through information that's been shared with us, through a close cooperation with the ITDB and our open source research. We have assessed 54 incidents that have taken place across the globe in December and the first 2 weeks in January. So I think that shows you just how many incidents are taking place. A large amount of those incidents are discovered and detected at border crossings. But if I'm honest, I think that is only just touching the surface. So, without going into individual details of individual cases, because as you say, there's 54 cases that cover unauthorized shipment, possession of material, theft of material, disposal of material. So a number of different incidents, and again, all starting to engage the criminal fraternity in that space. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. May I ask Adam if he wishes to complement or to add to what you just said? Do you share this perspective, this view?
No, I agree with John. This is a very serious area demanding a lot of attention, and the attention needs to be ongoing because this challenge that we're faced with is ever evolving. And there are many experts working not only in law enforcement, but our colleagues in the International Atomic Energy Agency, not only supporting the incident and illicit the incident and trafficking database, but other mechanisms for sound nuclear security detection architecture, combined with the ability to respond once materials are discovered, and then to control to complement the investigation process. And these are all elements that have many moving parts, and it's not a one size fits all. And this is a challenge with different member states and the resources that they have to accomplish this.
Thank you, Adam. My second question is kind of linked to the first. You hinted both at real cases of smuggling, for example, of nuclear or other radioactive material at borders. Now, based on your experience, can you tell us what types of radioactive material are mostly smuggled? And John, you mentioned rightfully so before intent, the importance of intent. So what are the intentions behind these cases if and when they become known? So I would ask maybe John again to go first.
Francesca, thank you. Yeah, a really good supplementary question on the one before. So rather than just focus on one isotope, one type of material, I can give you a summary of what I've just assessed this morning. Uranium ore, yellow cake, radium, cesium, cobalt, thorium, iridium. They're all, each one of those isotopes, each one of that material, that radioactive material, that nuclear material, is focused in each one of, not in all of the incidents, but across there. That's a summary of the material that is being recovered. So you can see that it's not just focused on one particular material or one particular isotope, but it's very much focused across a number of different isotopes. Now, I mentioned intent earlier on. It's something that is sadly lacking. It's a real gap in our understanding, and I think the law enforcement community's understanding of why is this material being trafficked? Why is this material being smuggled? Now, we don't know the truthful answer, and I think to go and just to scratch at the point that Adam made, the reason we don't know is we're not following up with investigations. The global community in terms of detection of material have been excellent, I would say, and very much focused on detection and recovery back under regulatory control, and it stops. So my point is we need to investigate further. We need to ask more questions in order to understand the true intent of the individual that's smuggling that material. Where is it going? Why is it being purchased? Where is the market? Who wants to buy it? Why do they want the material? You know, because at the end of the day, and you know, I like my phrases, my statements, the material does not commit the crime. It's the people who are smuggling the material that are committing the crime. I'd love to know, and I'd love to understand more as to what their intentions are, but we need to work together.
Thank you, John. And I would like to reiterate and emphasize the importance of intent, especially when we talk about this convention, ICSANT. Actually, the subjective element of the convention is especially important when it comes to the investigation, prosecution, and adjudication of crimes that fall under its scope of application. So I think that this discussion about intent is very relevant and pertinent. Adam, over to you. Do you wish to add to John's view?
I wish to add in the sense of communication and to emphasize, especially from the current activities that I'm delivering and colleagues I'm working with, to understand the various parts, the various resources, and to understand, yes, we need to define intent, but that also starts with good law enforcement practices, having strong legislation and regulations, and when that discovery is made, how it's handed off, how is the case developed, how is the evidence preserved to make sure that this process can be worked through. And to understand that member states may not have some of these resources on their own, and to look at international organizations, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Interpol, UNODC, different elements and others that could enhance that capability.
Thank you, Adam. You both have a lot of experience in law enforcement. You have a primarily law enforcement background, and national law enforcement, of course, seems to play a crucial role in responding to the threat of this type of material being smuggled across borders. So what agencies are involved and what agencies should be involved? Adam, would you like to go first?
I'll certainly, and please forgive me, those that are in attendance. I don't necessarily want to start with one. I would say from a border perspective, because in some instances we're talking about the movement of these materials, the law enforcement abilities, organizations, agencies that are at the border. That's not just customs. That could be border guard, frontier police, a host of others. Once it's discovered, where to store it, how to store it, the regulatory agencies and the communication. So it takes many organizations to work in concert together. And to emphasize what John said, to bring the material back under control and parallel begin the investigation. Some organizations may have specific roles associated to that investigation process, some roles to the control of the radioactive material. Some organizations will have elements in both the processes. The key, though, is the communication and to understand what the needs are before something bad happens, to try to prepare, maybe do some exercises, and to establish those lines of communication commensurate with their laws and regulations, to know and possibly work out any challenges, and then to strengthen abilities.
Thank you, Adam. John, same question to you.
Adam, I think we've written the same script. I think no, absolutely. There's, you know, when you've covered, I think, most of the elements that I have written down here as well, and I think it's truly. We say this in the passing, we said it many times. This is truly an area where it has to be a multi-agency response. No one agency can deal with this, has the skills, the knowledge, the experience to deal with this on their own. There are so many different moving parts to this. So it's such a niche area that involves the scientific side, the technical side, the law enforcement side, and they all have to come together. And Adam, I think your point about having those groups, having those policies and procedures in place before the incident, before the bad thing happens, is absolutely key. You know, let's have those meetings, let's arrange those policies beforehand. That's absolutely vital. And I think one area which I'd love to see more of, and I know, Adam, I know your program does this and does it very, very well, is when material is detected and has been discovered, is an assessment of the criminality. What is it? You know, an assessment at the early stage on criminality. Who do we have to involve? Build that into your processes, I think, is another element that's absolutely key. And Adam, something that you do in your, as I say, in your program very, very well.
Thank you, John. We talked about the actors, the agencies that are involved in the law enforcement response to this type of incidents. Now, let's look a little bit about the process itself. So my question is, in a hypothetical case of smuggling of nuclear or other radioactive material, what would be the process that law enforcement agencies would follow? Can you briefly outline it for us? John?
Francesca, yeah, thank you. Again, I have to support the work of ICSANT, because law enforcement, particularly the policing side of it, very much driven by processes, very much driven by policies, but those policies and processes are driven by legislation, by the criminal legislation that's in place. That, you know, when I talked about that criminal assessment, that joint criminal assessment, if we can get that in place, that's fantastic. If it's identified as a crime, now we start a process. That process is all about ensuring that we gather the evidence, and the evidence that is the correct evidence that's required in order to prosecute an individual within a due process of law, within a court process. So and they will be different depending on the legislation that's in place in each and every country. So I think first and foremost, we have to establish a good, strong criminal legislation. Once in terms of what under ICSANT. Once that's established, then we can build in, and I would encourage, and we more than help countries build in those processes and understand what's required. But yes, legislation then followed by processes, and each one will be very dependent on the individual country.
Thank you, John. Adam?
And I'll take it a slightly different step. Based on the foundation that John described, is the legislation and working within the country to determine the needs. He touched on that. And those needs are detection capabilities and response capabilities, and the responsible organizations for those various activities. There are some areas of assistance, certainly the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, through the responsibilities for ICSANT, the International Atomic Energy Agency with the nuclear security detection architecture and other tools that work with member states to be able to detect and respond to materials out of control, and to emphasize that criminality aspect. It is one thing to secure the material, but it's also important to stop the people that try to carry out these activities. So to define the intent and to have training for officers and officials that are throughout this process. That includes your frontline officers, also looking at your prosecutors and your judicial section to make sure they understand the terminologies and the severity of these actions.
Thank you both. You both already hinted in some of your responses to this. So you talked, for example, about the importance of cooperation and coordination between the different stakeholders. Now, I would like to ask you more specifically to elaborate on both the challenges that law enforcement agencies may face in addressing and responding to threats, to incidents such as both that we are talking about today, and on the other hand, I would like you to also share with us good practices that, in your view, proved effective in countering this threat. Adam, shall we go first with you?
Certainly. I'll take a stab at this. Some of the challenges are knowledge for, well, I'll speak to frontline officers. Law enforcement is a knowledge and understanding. When you even use the words nuclear and radioactive material, there is or tends to be a lack of understanding what is meant, and often you have a law enforcement community that is fearful. So the education of these officers to respect these types of materials, they are crossing the borders. They could and may interdict these in the future. To know the process and to appreciate the sensitivities that go with it. Now, the challenge is also manifested in many, when we talk about border environments, the changeover of personnel. So to have good procedures, to have good processes defined, and to emphasize these, you don't have to have formal training, but to keep them current, to look at current events, to get information, as John talked about, the incident and trafficking database. See if there are situations that are relevant, if there are nearby nuclear facilities or nuclear material or radioactive material, and to make sure that the officers stay current with these types of activities. I would also go so far as to include these types of topics and awareness raising in training academies, where the officers are getting basic information on other types of violations and concerns the state has, and to include this topic so it's not a shock. As far as good practices, I've seen good practices in a number of countries. To me, good practices are having that awareness, to having officers that know who to contact, and already have them on speed dial on their mobile phone, and they have communication with some of their experts, and the experts know what they can provide and know what to expect from the frontline officer. Also, having frontline officers trying to obtain more information. So to work with the officials, experts from the International Atomic Energy Agency, or in their countries, the regulatory agency. So I have seen that, and to promote this type of attitude. It's not going to fit everyone. So to find those officers that can be a catalyst for the organization. Is something that I would say is a good practice, and defining the procedures, to practice the procedures, identify shortcomings, and be prepared to address the unknown, because who knows?
Thank you, Adam. John, what is your take on challenges and best practices in this field? Over to you.
No, thank you, Adam. I absolutely agree. And again, you've covered, I think, the main challenges that law enforcement have, and also some of the solutions to them as well. But I think one of the other challenges that you have, particularly from a policing perspective, is identifying this subject as a priority. Funding is an issue, staffing is an issue, training is always an issue for police commanders. And when we're talking about an incident that is low probability but high impact, and then we're comparing that with incidents that are now other subjects such as drugs, violent crime, human trafficking, those are happening now. They're still big impact. Those are the priorities for most chiefs. So the allocation of funding, the allocation of resources, the allocation of training goes towards those areas because they're what are classed as the priority. I think the challenge is, Adam, as you say, raising awareness. That awareness raising is so important because it highlights the threat, it highlights the risks, highlights the need for some kind of response. So I think that is a huge challenge, something that we are trying to do that by sharing information and through education. And I think, again, also communicating between the multi-agencies, raising awareness across all agencies, suddenly gets this subject, this topic, the visibility that it requires in order to push it up that priority tree. So I think, yeah, good points and well made. Good. Some really good practices. Interestingly enough, the countries where I've seen really good practice at the borders tend to be countries that have experienced a lot of incidents. Now, I don't know if that's the chicken or the egg, whether the good practices are as a result or of the number of incidents or the number of detections are as a result of good practices. But it works, and it works really, really well. And, there's some really good models out there for others to follow.
Thank you both. My next question relates to the nuclear security detection architecture in general, especially for participants from the audience who might not be too familiar with this concept. Can you outline briefly for us what are the elements of the detection architecture that should be in place in order to properly and effectively detect and seize nuclear and other radioactive material out of regulatory control? John, would you like to start?
Francesca, yeah, this is an interesting one, because when I read this, I see it very much as equipment and training. Let's at border crossings, let's give the equipment there, the training there, the processes there. I think there is through communication, through that multi-agency approach, and through that information sharing, there's also a good and an identified need for sharing information that will help the prevention. So add a preventative measure to that detection architecture through sharing information, highlighting cases, which individuals are traveling at what times, what vehicles, really good flow of intelligence between law enforcement, the CTA, the intelligence agencies, and the border crossing, the border guards and customs, I think could really help that detection architecture, and some proactive operations. I know that takes place in many cases, but I think that would help. I mean, Adam, I think that, the equipment side of it is certainly your speciality.
Thank you, John. Adam, over to you. Do you wish to add anything?
John, thank you. And a couple of points, and I want to make sure to acknowledge the nuclear security series that the International Atomic Energy Agency has for this occasion, different elements. I agree with you on the equipment. However, I want to also add that the officer is not the only part. There are many elements. When I say that, the physical protection of the materials, the notification if materials have been identified as not being in the proper location, if there is challenges during the shipping process, the transfer process. So the point being is it's truly a team effort where all the roles are as essential on their own, but in concert with others. So we must work together. And you touched on that, the resources, the funding, procedures, the equipment is a good mechanism, and to ensure that this equipment is operating at its peak performance, and to make sure that procedures, especially those areas that aren't experienced, have mechanisms to test and make sure that the functionality is at a level that it needs to be.
Thank you both. We talked so far about the threat. We talked about the key elements of the systems that need to be in place to address it. And now I would like to move to focus on the work of your respective organizations and on the tools and resources that your organizations have made available, have developed in this field. And I would like to start with John. Well, we know, we are aware that there is a range of useful tools which have been developed by several entities. You both mentioned, rightfully so, the IAEA Incident and Trafficking Database, so the ITDB. Now, we would like to hear about the resources that Interpol has developed and which might be useful in connection with border management. And in general, what is the role of Interpol in this field? What are the types of activities and training, for example, that you can offer? So I think that this would be very helpful for our audience to know. John, over to you.
Francesca, thank you. And you know, without wishing this to sound like a marketing spiel, I think it's a very important topic. And if I take the overall mission or mandate of Interpol is to connect law enforcement to law enforcement or to any other agencies that will help them conduct the investigations that they need, then absolutely that is our role. And I think this is a perfect example of connecting with the UN agencies, the customs, the border guards. That's our role. That's what we can do. I think if I look at my unit in particular and our program, I think there are two main areas that really, what has been a consistent theme throughout this discussion has been communication and information sharing. And I think that is an area that we can help with, not just with law enforcement, but with other organizations. And the Project Geiger and the Geiger database is an area that we can help share that information. The whole purpose of Geiger is to understand what's going on in the world, what incidents are taking place, what criminal incidents are taking place, what MOs, particular MOs are being shared and used by criminals. How do they link into terrorist organizations? So collecting all of that information, analyzing all of that information, and then passing that out in the way of analytical products as widely as we possibly can, I think provides the international organizations, other law enforcement organizations, with the knowledge and understanding that is needed, one, again, to raise the priority of the subject, to raise their awareness, educate individuals, and hopefully provide more detection of material out of regulatory control. However, as with any recipe, that cake is only as good as the ingredients that go into it. So our analytical products are only as good as the information that you give us. You know, we're relying on the information that's shared with us. We are as proactive as we can. But again, I think one of the areas, and I'm more than happy if anyone on the call wants to connect with me after this, to connect them with the Geiger team and to get that information out. The other area that we can support with and do support with is capacity building. Training in crime scene investigations, training in crime scene managers, not management, but also the awareness of that and the awareness of frontline officers training as well. So very much about awareness training, but capacity building at the same time. So I think communications, yes, we can connect law enforcement with other agencies to support their investigations. We can provide the information and the intelligence to the relevant agencies as and when required. And we can provide capacity building in terms of the crime scene management, the crime scene awareness, the crime scene investigations. So I think there's a number of areas, but I would, I think, like to focus more on the information sharing, because that's the easiest part that we can connect all the agencies together.
Thank you, John. And if I may add, we've been glad and lucky to partner with you and to benefit from your expertise on a number of occasions in the delivery of our own technical assistance activities. And here I would like to mention in particular the mock trial on ICSANT that we organized approximately one year ago, an exercise that we will replicate in the future, and to which a number of international partners, including Interpol, contributed. This was an exercise revolving around a fictional cases, a fictional scenario, covering a range of offenses falling under the scope of application of this convention, including smuggling at borders. And the key objective of this exercise, of this event, was to stimulate a discussion among law enforcement and other criminal justice officers on the potential challenges which may arise in connection with the investigation, prosecution, and adjudication of nuclear and radiological crimes in general. So we look forward to continuing this partnership with you and with Interpol in general. Adam, over to you. I would like to ask you now, what is the role of UNODC Border Management Branch and your unit in particular, and any training activities, tools, or resources that you may share with us?
Thank you, Francesca. Some of the elements, following on with what John said, in some instances, some instruments, detection instrument capabilities, often in conjunction with other member states that provide funding, resources, partnering possibly with our colleagues at the International Atomic Energy Agency. There also, our training involves working at the front line with risk indicators, and often risk indicators will not tell you what the risk is. So to foster a questioning attitude, and when I talk about the border environment, I'm talking about land, air, and sea. We passenger and cargo border team are but one pillar of many in the Border Management Branch of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. We also have some activities in our sister program, the Global Maritime Crime Program, that also has capabilities to do training for vessel-based detection and response. So there's a number of focuses, but something John said earlier, the officers that we're working with, nuclear and radioactive material are not their first priority. However, it is a significant priority. And in fact, for our strategic trade training, we emphasize about nuclear aspects because of the sheer devastation that could be had from a nuclear event. And we want to prevent that as much as possible. We also emphasize the relationships. It goes back to the communication, that the border officials work with others, and we try to invite the regulatory agencies, nuclear, radiological, to come and share their expertise, and hopefully foster a relationship that goes beyond the few days that we spend in training. And I think that's most important, because often we find that those relationships do not exist. And again, to be proactive in doing this before something bad happens. As far as the investigation, we work with other programs within the Border Management Branch to seek criminality. We also communicate with our colleagues, Francesca and others, in the Terrorism Prevention Branch to try to address the connection between the conventions and instruments to what the law enforcement needs. There is a bit of a loss when we talk to frontline officers and why it's important and that they have a role. And to include other ministries like the Ministries of Foreign Affairs that also have a role in how that message is conveyed, how they bring it to their member state, and how they convey back to the international community that they're doing something. So there's a number of aspects. It does vary from country to country. There are some very active ministries, agencies, organizations in the country in some instances. In others, it is a topic that still needs a lot of attention and to find a balance to convey the message and to integrate it, fostering that questioning attitude with the officer that if they see something, if they suspect it's radioactive, to not just run away, but to do something, to call somebody, to bring that material and under control, regulatory control, as well as to think about the law enforcement, the intent implications.
Thank you both for providing an overview of the breadth of your respective programs, and especially for sharing the type of assistance services that may be available to member states. And I would also like to mention that under the third phase of our Canada-funded project that I mentioned at the beginning of this event, we will partner with colleagues from our border management branch to conduct 2 tabletop exercises for customs frontline officers and nuclear regulatory authorities on ICSANT and in general on the legal and regulatory aspects of detecting, seizing, and handling radioactive material at borders, and including related investigations. These events will target relevant officials in 2 regions, respectively Latin America and the Caribbean, and in Southeast Asia. And of course, we will also invite international partners, including the IAEA and Interpol, to participate and to provide the subject matter expertise. I have one more question, which brings me back to the link we are trying to establish between ICSANT in particular and the legal framework on nuclear security more in general, and border management. So I would like to ask you to what in your opinion is the role of a legal framework in the context of border management? Adam, would you like to start?
Certainly, thank you. The role is to define what the officials are enforcing, and that message needs to be clear, and it needs to be something that is revisited, as we've talked about throughout our time together today. It's not a one and done. So to find ways to keep it fresh, to look at current events, to be mindful of what is taking place in other areas, to look at what's happening in open source information, and to keep it fresh for frontline officers, law enforcement officers, so that it's not their first priority, but it's definitely a priority that should be resident in their mind, and to think about steps to take next as defined in response to responsibilities of ICSANT framework.
Thank you, Adam. John, you mentioned earlier the importance of criminal legislation, so you already partially touched upon this. You partially replied, but is there any other additional thought that you would like to share with us?
Francesca, absolutely, and I think it's a great way to summarize what we've already talked about today. Because for me, I look at ICSANT and I would say that a country that has strong criminal legislation in place creates a challenging environment for criminals to operate in. That makes it less likely that they're going to either try to bring material into the country, whatever that looks like, if we're denying them that opportunity. and therefore makes your borders a much more secure area. So I think, you know, strong legislation creates strong boundaries, strong borders, and creates a difficult environment for criminals to operate in. It's very, very simple.
Thank you both. Before we wrap up this discussion, I would like to ask you if there's any other thought, comment, or information you may wish to share with our audience. Adam?
No, thank you, Francesca, for this opportunity, and to continue discussing this and to find creative ways to elevate this topic with our colleagues and within our member states to keep it fresh. So thank you very much.
Thank you. John, over to you.
No, likewise, Adam, again, I agree, reiterate everything Adam said. You know, we have to keep this fresh. We have to work together. More than happy if you want to share my contact details with anyone, and we can continue to work together. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, John. I'm mindful of time, and I also realize that I'm also aware that Adam has a flight to catch soon. So this brings us to the end of this event. I would like to thank, first of all, our two speakers for sharing with us their expertise and shedding light on one aspect of this convention, ICSANT, which may not be apparent at the first reading, but that, as we have seen, is an essential component of a state's nuclear security architecture. By requiring the adoption of preventive as well as mitigating measures and ensuring the effective investigation, prosecution, and adjudication of crimes involving material out of regulatory control, ICSANT can help contribute to establishing robust and effective nuclear security regimes. And so it also contributes to strengthening security at the national, regional, and global level. Before concluding, I would just like to remind you that you can find information on this convention, on the tools and resources that UNODC has developed in this regard, and also on our work in the field of nuclear security on the dedicated UNODC website on ICSANT. We will also be sending regularly a newsletter on our CBRN work in general, starting next week. The first issue will cover highlights for 2023, and it will be followed by quarterly updates. For any request of information regarding this event, regarding the convention, or our technical assistance, you can write to our ICSANT email address, and we will be sharing with you over the next few days an email with relevant information, including links, email addresses, and websites. Finally, as mentioned at the beginning, this is just the first event of a series of talks on several aspects of ICSANT and nuclear security. In the coming months, we will explore other topics together with experts from other international organizations, such as the IAEA, our colleagues next door, but also with NGOs and academia. So I would like to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and we hope to see you at our next event of the series. Thanks again, and have a nice rest of the day.